Thanks for this. Hey everyone, my name is Edward. I help lead growth strategy on the Pyth network. For those who don't know, Pyth is the world's largest and fastest growing first-party financial oracle. That means it's our job to bring financial data, including prices of assets, cryptocurrencies, equities, ETFs, commodities. We take that wonderful price data and send it to all your favorite blockchains, including ZetaChain, for all your favorite DeFi applications to power their operations.
Hi everyone. My name is Arthur. I'm a CEO and co-founder of SocialScan. For those of you who don't know about SocialScan, we are a community-owned large language model that specializes on everything on chain. So think of us as more like a Web3 dedicated search engine, but you can actually search anything happening on chain in real time. And underneath the SocialScan, we're actually building what we call Chimera protocol. And on top of that, anyone can actually come in and customize their own AI agent, and to support their own protocol, etc. Prior to that, I actually built another company with Shuo, my co-founder, CTO, and prior to that, we both graduated from Stanford. I got my PhD in physics, etc., etc. Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Ethan Francis, although I go by the alias Tabasco online. And I am from Particle Network. The kind of easiest way to understand Particle Network is we kind of use this new tagline that is quite recent, but we're the modular blockchain powering chain abstraction, which ties really closely into this idea of Omnichain. You might know us for our social logins. We have kind of MPC-based wallets integrated across the ecosystem. This was kind of our foundational product that we released just, I guess a year and a half ago now. And recently, we've been getting really into the Omnichain space. So of course, through our our partnership with ZetaChain, we've worked a lot on that front. And also now we're actually building products that achieve this idea of chain abstraction, which is essentially Omnichain materialized in a sense where users can leverage an application where they don't really need to think about the chain that they're using. So this is kind of what we're building today. But yeah, we do social logins, we do Omnichain account abstraction, we do intents, stuff like that to achieve this idea of chain abstraction. That's the easiest way to understand Particle Network.
Hello. I'm Dimitri, co-founder and CEO of Subsquid. We build a decentralized data lake and a query engine for on-chain data for EVM chains and soon Solana. We allow developers to very efficiently access all this data and also provide flexible and sharp tools to decode, transform, and organize their data, which is one of the most popular use cases on the indexing space.
And of course, right here,
yeah.
Mic number 6.
Hello, my name is Jane, and I am the marketing manager at Covalent, which is the #1 indexer in the blockchain space. And we take all the 200 plus chains that we index, and we schematize all of that data and pipe it through our unified API and service that data in a multitude of consumable formats for developers. And on the other side of that, we're actually building out the Ethereum Wayback Machine that is a fully modular data availability solution.
All right, well, thank you everyone for that intro. So we'll start off kind of diving into, in the Omnichain world, EVM is a very big player, right? Ethereum itself and EVM. With your projects, tell us, are you only are you only EVM focused, or where do you see that in the grand scheme of Omnichain?
Yeah, I'll start. So a lot of people know Pyth Network as originally the Solana Oracle. So that was quite interesting, right? Because we're coming in with this new Oracle technology intended to be cross-chain down the line. Why then are we starting with Solana? What is our perspective on EVM? We think EVM is here to stay, and for good reason, especially as potentially the ultimate settlement layer down the line. But there were aspects of the Pyth network technology that made it very compelling to base our original Oracle solution on. Nevertheless, we take a sort of app chain approach. So Pyth network has forked Solana to create the first SVM. And with that, we have the PythNet app chain. There we do the magic of getting data from market makers, exchanges, and trading firms who run these Solana validators on this private chain. But then through a generic messaging protocol called Wormhole, we send Pyth data to all your favorite chains, including in the EVM world. So we believe EVM is here to stay. We believe in the strength of a diversity of a number of chains. But Solana happens to be the technology we leverage for the Oracle functionality of Pyth.
Cool. Yeah, speaking of Omnichain, we're definitely Omnichain. The future roadmap will definitely include supporting not only EVM, but also Solana, Near, and many other ecosystems. But I think, when I think about Omnichain, I would like to take one step back and think about a picture, right? If you think about Web3 as like building a new world, and the different blockchains, you can make an analogy as building the underlying ground, underlying pipes, so that the ground is secure, and different dApps are really building the cities, right? Cities are built on top of the blockchains, where it's also getting secured by the blockchain infrastructure. And then ZetaChain, in my understanding, is really connecting all the different pipes and different underlying infrastructure, make it secure, make it more liquid, unify liquidity, et cetera, so that better dApps can be built on top of that. And then for us at SocialScan, we're more like an information middle layer. That's more like internet connections, right? Connecting different cities, different people, so that they can actually make sense of what's going on with the world, right? So definitely Omnichain is in our big vision as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. I thought that was really good. At Particle, we definitely don't restrict the idea of Omnichain to just EVM chains. Of course, infrastructurally and programmatically, it's much easier to achieve Omnichain or chain abstraction within the EVM environment because everything's cross-compatible. But what we're building for, especially in the long term, is actually compatibility across non-EVM chains. So Bitcoin has been a really big focus for us recently. We actually released this product maybe 3 months ago at this point called BTC Connect, which actually using EVM allows users to take a native Bitcoin wallet like Unisat or OKX or something, and then actually use that wallet on an EVM compatible chain. So for example, a Bitcoin layer 2 like Rootstock or B Squared or something like that. So what we want to do is for end users, this is really the perspective that we take. The entire experience should feel uniform, regardless of if they're on native Bitcoin, if they're on a Bitcoin layer 2, if they're on a normal EVM chain, or if they're on Solana, or even Near or something like that. We just had a great conversation with Near the other day, and we're very excited about that ecosystem and how that fits into this idea of chain abstraction and Omnichain. So for us, this is as a long-term goal, we want every ecosystem, regardless of if it's EVM or not, to be a part of this idea of complete chain abstraction. So an application can be deployed on Solana or otherwise, and really the user shouldn't necessarily know a large difference from whether it's an EVM chain. This is the long-term goal. It's a difficult goal to achieve, but this is what we're building towards at Particle, and we definitely believe in the greater blockchain ecosystem outside of just EVM.
So the Omnichain thing really resonates with Subsquid because our data lake is chain agnostic. So it is designed to be agnostic with respect to what kind of data you put it in. So we have data that is specific to the EVM chains, and together it goes with substrate chains that we support. So we have more than 100 EVM chains already in the data lake, probably something like 50 or substrate. Then it goes together with this Solana data, and then we will also add Cosmos chains. Also we have Tron. So basically we think about it as this overwhelming ocean of data, and in the future it will be possible to have joins across all the data that we have here. So for example, if an application wants to have a unified picture from Solana, Ethereum, Base, Arbitrum, it's going to be trivial to extract this data in a single batch. Right now, you can do this basically running parallel processes for each chain. But overall, we are super bullish on the multi-chain and up-chain thesis, and definitely the user experience will be spread out across multiple chains in the future.
So when we look at an omni-chain world, we look at the various layers, and this is brought up a lot of different times, but we actually start with Bitcoin because it's the largest trading pair and it's the mother chain. And when you abstract a little bit further, you have Ethereum as your L1 and L2s on top of that, and then L3s, which you could even look at as Farcaster and Frames. And that's all these little ecosystems building out on top of that. And it goes from there further and further. And all of that data all flows down to our unified API. So it's really important for big funds to be able to take that schema data and be able to run their models with it. So when it comes to an omni-chain world, it's all about where is the value flowing and where does it flow to.
Gotcha. Great. Thanks, everyone. I like those answers. And you kind of touched on a point, both of you guys at the end there, around some of the difficulties with dealing with omni-chain data, right? And so for anyone who's been focused on single chain, this is a really good thing to know and why these projects bring a lot of value. Starting at the other end, Jane, right? So I think Covalent does over 200 chains or something like that. If you could speak to just sort of what are the challenges with doing with such a wide variety of chains?
Well, it's async, right? So you have that initial problem of they're all completely different specs, they're completely different implementations, and you need to be able to scale your infrastructure to be able to support that, and then unify that schema in order to provide that API. So it's a technical challenge, but we spent the last year really pushing hard on expanding our reach as far as we could because, we see the importance of that.
Great, thanks. And yeah, Dimitri, to you as well. I'm curious what challenges you've encountered as you've progressed down this omni-chain world.
Yeah, it's kind of similar. So I think, especially for developers, one of the biggest challenges working with the zoo of EVM chains is that they're not really spec compliant. So each, especially smaller chains, have their own quirks. For example, some chains don't even care about verifying their logs Bloom filter. So they have events, but they don't really match the block filter, or even the block hash may not be consistent with the transaction root receipts, which is kind of breaks the whole premise of the blockchain. But at the end of the day, developers need this data. So we, once we put this data into our data lake, we verify and fix all these quirks. So basically, when, for example, DeFi protocols come and start using Subsquid, they get more reliable data compared to as if they were using RPC directly. Because RPC has a lot of glitches, it doesn't scale, it is super slow, and yeah, the most important thing is that you cannot even trust the data, even though we kind of have this picture that the node gives you the source of truth, but in reality it doesn't.
Well, you can't use RPC for analytics.
Yeah, of course. I mean, but even for very basic things, like give me all the transactions in specific block and give me events, for smaller chains, and sometimes I even call them shit chains because they don't even actually conform to the spec, you cannot even trust them on a basic RPC response level. So we pull all this data, we process it, we fix all these quirks, and then developers can use this data directly from the data lake in a lot more efficient way, and also they know that the data actually sound.
Great, thanks. And I see Arthur, it seems like you want to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I think this is a great question, by the way, because for us, for the past 2 years, we've been really trying to understand how to best tackle data and apply AI into Web3. But let me, before we give the detailed answers, but let's take one step back and think about what's the biggest difference between Web3 data and Web2. I think it's actually twofold. On one side, if you look at Web3 ecosystem, right, omnichain world, it's actually a very, very decentralized development that's happening, right? It's like what you see with Denver, new development, new dApps, new protocols, new assets getting published every single day, week, and month, right? This month is like 404. Well, yeah, it's February, right? Last month and the month before was inscription, BRC20, et cetera, et cetera. So on the other side, from a user perspective, the user's needs are, majority of them are constantly seeking for alphas or new assets to trade on, right? That's the biggest use case. We just have to say that. And in certain use cases, people may want to look for new gaming, SocialFi. I think it's still very early, to be honest. But all in all, is like looking for new assets to trade on. And then you see this vast gap in between, which is like chicken and egg problem that we need to solve. On one side, developers cannot keep up with what the users want. On the other side, the users are constantly seeking what the developers are developing in terms of a new protocol, right? So how do you actually tackle that? I think and then on our side, we find it took us again 2 years to really figure out the answer. For one, from a developer perspective, I think we, with our protocol, Chimera protocol, we definitely want to enable an ecosystem-wide development into a public goods data infrastructure. If you think about it, right, all the blockchains, they are trustless, accessible, so that the data, everything, single piece of data or datum is already democratized in Web3, and that has to go somewhere like a data lake, so that other people, when developers or users want to query it, it can be high performance. But this data lake or whatever it is has to be publicly available in a certain way, so that it can incentivize a developer to deposit their code into this kind of data infrastructure. So on the other side, users, again, then the question still persists, right? Like, how does user actually interact with this sort of data infrastructure? Because if you don't see it, you don't know it. You don't know it, then people don't know what to develop, right? So that's why we added a large language model layer where we can actually let the AI directly talk to the user, making sense of what they are looking for, and fetch the most desired APIs or data or API combinations to answer the user. Even if we cannot find it, at least the developers know what the users are up to, right? What they are looking for. So that really, in our view, is generating this flywheel. Hopefully, with our work, we can actually empower a lot of developers to actually, like incentivize them to innovate, so that they can actually get their, new innovation to users the fastest. And likewise for users, right? Like me, I'm a busy founder and CEO. So I don't have time to figure out, hey, what the fuck is going on with BTC, right? Why is like 65,000 suddenly, right? But ideally, I should have some sort of AI expert that's really just making sense of all that data and telling me, oh, maybe Warren Buffett bought some bank. Maybe something like that, right? It's happening. But yeah, that's a long answer. Yeah.
So a question with that though. So with SocialScan, if a user, or a developer or user, someone comes in and goes, I'm looking for up-to-date price information, right?
Yeah.
Is that going to give them price information, or will that send them to somebody else who does a good job of that? Like,
yeah, definitely just send it to somebody else who does the job, right? Like oracles or who are experts in doing this. In fact, in our soon to be launched like SocialScan app, when you actually come in, one of the biggest features is actually like a GPT store. We call it agent store, but it's like every single agent is first party developed to support other protocols like Story Protocol, Verax, some replication protocol, and many others, right? And we also envision individuals like influencers or traders who are experts in understanding certain assets can also customize their agents. So that really becomes an ecosystem view that
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thanks for all that. So we started touching on the user element. Or did you have something you want to respond with, Jane?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, pricing is really difficult, right? You look at USDC price itself. You have to source the price. You have to, what is the truth, right? What is the source of truth? And so you have to source that centralized exchange price first, and then from there you have to also source it from all the different dexes at right at the tick transaction level, and be able to then provide that source of truth to funds in order to capture our opportunities.
Which I guess is, for someone who hasn't done that previously, right? It's easy to think just like, oh yeah, you just kind of hit refresh and grab the price real quick, right? But yeah, I think when you think high performance trading, it becomes much more important. Do you have anything to add on that as far as price aggregation goes and your challenges in the Omnichain space with that?
Let me just comment on it from the perspective of a smart contract developer, right? You're an application building somewhere in the world, and you know that your users want to make a trade, or they're settling, or they're borrowing or lending, and they need the theoretically accurate price for that asset. What then is that price, and is a centralized exchange API good enough? The answer for the Pyth network is not quite, because if you think about what actually is the price of an asset, it's either someone's willingness to pay for that price, so the bid-ask spread at an exchange, or it's a precedent transaction. It's the last price that someone paid for that exact asset, assuming it's a standardized asset that isn't idiosyncratic. Given this fundamental understanding of what an asset price is, for us it's very important that we go to first-party data sources where price discovery is actually happening. So you go to all the centralized exchanges, you go to the decentralized exchanges, you go to the market makers, you go to the proprietary trading firms, and you convince them and you incentivize them to contribute their data live to your Oracle network, in our case, the PythNet app chain. It's very important to make that distinction because legacy Oracle models kind of operate on the assumption that, hey, there's an ocean of Web 2 data out there. If you go to Yahoo Finance, you go to Google Finance, you go to CoinGecko, you go to CoinMarketCap, sure, you get like some freemium aggregate of the price. But that's very different from what's actually happening, at sub-second speeds in the high-frequency trading world. Right, and you don't want to be securing your smart contracts on data that's scraped from opaque sources. It's extremely delayed. You don't really know where it comes from.
Thanks. And so I want to switch a little bit. We had people mentioned users, right? User experience is always a big topic, and I want to give Particle Network something to talk about. So we're going to start with you. How does your application kind of improve the user experience in the Omnichain space?
For sure. I guess I want to actually do two things real quick. So first is on the data side and challenges that we have. Actually, for context, our wallet, which we onboard users into after they go through social login, so Google phone numbers, stuff like that, we give them this central wallet interface, and this requires data. So we need some way to pull data across the 65 different chains that we support. Right now, we use a few different data providers, one of which is Covalent. So I just want to point out, from purely the developer perspective of requiring data and needing a place to get it, a lot of the names on stage right now have been super important for us to make sure that we can do that accurately and at high speeds. So this is one thing when it comes to how we are improving user experience in Omnichain world. This is something that we've thought a lot about over the last really 6 months now, because over the past year or so, we've been really focused on this onboarding problem, and we kind of see user experience as being two main issues. One is actually getting users into an account. So how do you have a user onboard into an application? This is kind of a difficult thing, right? Usually with normal wallets, you have them download some sort of extension or an application. They have a seed phrase. They write down that seed phrase, and they have to secure that themselves. I mean, this is starting to get a little bit convoluted, right? So what's an alternative that we can do to get users into applications as quick as possible? So for us, that was social logins, right? So having users click on Google and signing with a Google account, and then using that as their means into an application. But we realized very quickly, this is a good solution, and we have, like I mentioned, 17 million users on this wallet, a bunch of, I think over 4 million at this point daily active users, which is great. But a lot of the feedback that we had is as soon as a user gets into an application with social login, they've onboarded into some sort of blockchain, it's immediately they encounter a wall of friction. This is usually when it comes to actually interacting with the chain beyond a single application. Because now you start getting into multi-chain. Now this user, let's say they want to go interact with a different application, and they're on Ethereum, they want to go to Base, or they want to do something like that, right? This is where it becomes very advanced, and you can't expect new users to really understand how to do this or do it successfully in a short period of time. So for us, what we want to do is actually attack both of these problems, the onboarding problem and the interaction problem, which is why recently we focused a lot more on this idea of chain abstraction, which we feel encompasses, number one, the actual social login side, so the first half of that issue, which is the onboarding component, and focuses additionally on the second problem, which is the interaction problem. So we're going to be doing this. We'll have more information pretty soon, but you guys are some of the first people to hear about this. We're going to be making announcements and stuff like that over the next few weeks, but we're going to be basically building this infrastructure that allows users and allows developers to create this experience where you go into an application with your social login. Within this application, like I mentioned earlier, you have no idea what chain it's on. So it could be on Ethereum, could be on Base, it could be on Optimism, whatever. You as a user, you have no idea, because what's happening in the back end is that essentially the actual transactions that you're doing and the balances that you're having are coming from a central source. So usually this could be a blockchain. It's kind of what we're thinking about. Something that can allow for a central user experience that can aggregate and kind of consolidate every other chain into one core UX. So as a user, you have no idea that you're interacting with 5 different chains across the same application or across different applications. It's one UX. So it feels a lot like Web 2 for users. And this is how you get into a user experience where ideally, anybody can start using Web 3. there is not a lot of complexity left after that, after you've simplified interaction and after you've simplified onboarding. So this is kind of the direction that we take, and we're focusing a lot on Omnichain and chain abstraction going into the next few months.
Great, thanks. And it sounds like your answer kind of encompasses how other data services can provide help with that. But I want to get you guys' opinion on that as well. How would you say your data lake helps support the improved Omnichain user experience, and same with Covalent after?
Yeah, so our approach is that developers always know better how they want to design their application. So I think like we ourselves and Covalent are like a different opposite of the spectrum. So we provide a very efficient way to get raw data exactly the same way that it would get it from an RPC. Ref, raw, not decoded. And then we have one of the best tooling in the ecosystem to actually work with this through our open source SDK. And when it comes to multi-chain, the way it works is that they can set up multiple independent processes, each responsible for each network. So for example, if you want to onboard like 20 chains, there will be 20 lightweight indexers all writing into the same data source. And then you have a unified API that serves the data exactly the same way as the developer actually need. And that has a lot of advantages due to the full control that you have as an app developer over the whole system, while bypassing the hardest part, which is actually obtaining the raw data due to the inaccessibility of the RPC, for example. So also, assuming that, for example, you want to integrate another chain, which is super obscure, it's not supported by any other provider, you're not locked into any vendor, because you can, for example, add another process, and even if this network is not integrated with Subsquid, you can still pull this data directly from the RPC. So basically, our approach here is that we give full control to the developers and maximal flexibility, and they can build things the way that makes most sense to their application. And yeah, solving basically the bottleneck of the accessing the raw data.
So we actually agree that a lot of developers typically just start with RPC when it comes to actually getting that data in their developer workflow. So very shortly, later in this year, we're going to be supporting read-only RPC, and that's going to include having all of Infura's archive data as a part of our backend infrastructure. And that's going to lead into later in the year with Class C that allows developers to spin up their own use cases to index very specific, at an enterprise scale, specific niche, event logs for whatever they need that for. But that's an enterprise product. But for what's useful for developers right now, actually our SDK is now available through VM, which has 100,000 downloads, weekly downloads, which is if you're a TypeScript developer on Ethereum, it's huge. And on top of that, we have Gold Rush, which, I'm tired of seeing block height in a receipts view when I interact with an app. And I'm also tired of just being, shown a splash page on some application and a connector wallet, and you connect into it, and then you can do some DeFi on it, but you don't have any view beyond that. So Gold Rush is actually a UI kit that allows you to build out these bespoke experiences that showcase all of that live data. Whether it's a dashboard, a point system, a leaderboard, internal tooling. It could be a block explorer if you really wanted to build that, but that's not the main goal. And you can showcase all of those niche event calls with Gold Rush decoder, and it's all in the repo. It's open source, and that all feeds into the API. And because we already have all the data, not everything is indexed, but the stuff that needs to be indexed can be handled by the decoder for those use cases. And then down the line, we'll have Class C.
Great, thanks. And so it sounds like all that data, like the example you were just giving there, that would be pulling back to, again, your basically multiple chains worth of data. Then the developer wouldn't be tied into any specific one. Is that right? Sorry, just with what you were describing there, it was Gold Rush?
Yes.
Yeah, so, right, as the user experience you first explained, right, of you go there, you have to connect your wallet, it's very much so like connect to one network, connect to one wallet. tools you were describing, that user experience, that would be able to interact with data from all of the chains you guys are indexing.
Yes, that'd be all the data that we index, and it's open source, so use it. You can pull in other API data as well. So an example is like maybe you have a lending app and you put a little receipts view, and it shows you the rate that you're getting on the app, and you could pull in a bank API and show what they would offer, and then show how much better it is in Web3.
Gotcha, great, thank you.
Bring in that semantic meaning.
Yeah, I wanted to like touch on Gold Rush real quick, actually from our perspective, because we released a tutorial, maybe it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago now, which was using social logins with Gold Rush to achieve like you mentioned, kind of like multi-chain data aggregation. So like this is a big part of the user experience like we're thinking about as well. So again, log in with your social account, then you get to some sort of UI that like maybe uses Gold Rush or something, and this data is, of course, for end users, all aggregated into one location. So there isn't really this idea of switching chains or multi-chain management, because again, usually, I think due to the nature of Covalent's API and of course how it works, this is kind of enabled by that. So we have this tutorial full in our documentation, I think even a video that Covalent made for us about like, using social logins to go into an application that uses Gold Rush to have like this, full multi-chain data feed. So there's a lot of really cool potential there.
Great, thanks for adding that. So I got 2 questions for Pyth Network. One, is it Pyth Network? I'm saying that correct?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. Second question, you mentioned earlier how you guys forked Solana and ended up building your own app chain for this, right? So talking about Omnichain, there's a lot of chains out there. Why did you decide to build your own instead of using one of the existing ones?
That's a great question. So let's start from the perspective of why Solana, right? Why fork Solana? Why create the world's first SVM? Back in the day, when we first looked at Solana in 2021, we definitely saw the advantages of high throughput, extremely high throughput, chain to base our Oracle operations on, right? So the original V1 of Pyth Network was, okay, we're going to be a push Oracle, and we're going to push price updates on chain, starting with Solana every 400 milliseconds, every Solana slot. The aggregation will come every slot after. And that was great until, Solana became so popular that during, hype NFT mints or whatever, there would be network congestion. And of course, when the network is congested, so does the Oracle, and it becomes unusable. That's one issue within Solana. But then if we want to continue having Pyth prices go cross-chain to other ecosystems, whether it's EVM or Cosmos or Move, it's not good to have the Oracle itself become stalled because the original blockchain that it lives on itself becomes congested. So that gave us the idea of, okay, we can sort of have our cake and eat it too if we take the advantages of Solana and build out this new app chain and make it so that all the validators and owners of that chain are the data providers themselves. This way, they own 100% of the network. All the resources go towards running the Pyth network software on PythNet, and we're not competing with NFT bots or other DeFi protocols. And this is very cool because whatever happens on Solana will not affect us, and we can continue sending price updates from PythNet to any chain out there. Right now, funnily enough, PythNet does not support Solana, but soon even Solana users will be using data from PythNet.
Great, thanks for that. And continuing that trend of sort of why you all decided to build what you did despite some of the existing stuff, I want to ask over on SocialScan, there are some LLMs that already exist. Some of them are even open source. Why did you decide to build it the way you decided to build?
Yeah, very good question. I think, first off, I think building a large language model, the barrier is going to be dramatically lower. The barrier of entry into AGI is going to be much lower. Anyone in future can pretty much train any sort of large language model, just like what we had with deep learning, computer vision type of thing. But taking one step back, if you look at today, at the intersection of crypto and AI, I think there's obviously huge missing piece of some sort of large language model that specializes on understanding everything on chain, meaning every single piece of transaction on chain. And then one might be wondering, hey, why hasn't anyone done this before? It's partially because of the technical challenges that mentioned by our friends at Covalent and Subsquid, because aggregating massive amount of data from Omnichain in real time is just very expensive, technically challenging. On the other side, like I mentioned in my previous analogy, right? Because there's so many different data protocols, in Web3, and so many new data protocols happening in Web3, and the hotspot of people's attention are constantly changing. And it takes a team of developers forever to just keep up with that and understand that transaction manually by themselves. So that's, I think, another layer of challenge for people to actually train such a model. And the last one is, even if you can train such model, and then what are the use cases? Why would people, go to SocialScan, for example, to look for some piece of information instead of EtherScan? And that means at least one has to make sense of data first, and then on the other side, on the front end, we at the SocialScan probably have to build a certain type of UI to display to the users, and then people will try to figure out what this means, et cetera, et cetera. You go into this rabbit hole of endless development, right? So that's why building the large language model itself is just part of the part of the solution to solve the puzzle. Another big piece is really to make the large language model and also the underlying data infrastructure more available, more decentralized, and customizable to any of the developers who are actually building something cool. Our vision is really underneath the data layer, right? Like there's a lot of pipelining, RPC solutions, databases. I'm not going to go into detail, but there's really good projects out there you can actually reference to. For example, DeFi Llama. DeFi Llama is a go-to place for understanding DeFi protocols, right? But if you look into their data, their code base in GitHub, right? Different developers deposit certain piece of code to GitHub so that their project can actually get listed on DeFi Llama in a good way, right? So why don't we actually expand that that concept to across Omnichain to other protocols, right? So that's a goal. So as such, taking it together, there's so much amount of engineering work in just so that involved in building such an infrastructure, not just large language model, but also the underlying data infrastructure, and also a lot of plugins, support, so that other developer, when they build like a, let's call it plugin, right? Like a data protocol plugin, so that their data can actually make sense, so that large language model can understand, just like what humans does, right? So that the model can actually pick up that information and show it to the user in a nice way. So that's a goal. And then compared with many of the other large language model in the space, I think we just we are positioned in a very different way. Yeah.
Gotcha. Great, thank you for that. Then I saw Dimitri nodding very vigorously down there. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, because we have like a very much aligned vision of having data contributed from the community. In our case, this is more about large data sets. So for example, if you produce a lot of historical market data and you want to make it accessible for the developers, or for example, you launch a new chain and you want to be integrated as soon as possible, then you can basically contribute your data set into the Subsquid network, and it will be possible to efficiently query and work with this data. So I think we have a very good example of DeFi Llama and also Dune Analytics, that this community is actually bring a lot of value, and of course there should be some kind of moderation, but in general that brings like a leveraged effect of like all different people contributing to a whole new thing, as long as you can operate this in a unified fashion.
Great, thanks for adding that. And so for Particle Network, one question I wanted to ask about, right, why do it your way versus some of the standard way? You guys do a lot of things, but if we look at specifically like account abstraction, why did you take your approach compared to one of the standard like 4.3 or 4.6.6.7, I think, the ERC7, yeah, the Ethereum version?
Yeah, so like the way that we approach account abstraction is that, like, I guess for context, whenever a user onboards through their social account, what we do is we actually allow developers to choose between two different paths for users to take. First is that the user just uses like an externally owned account to interact with the application, which essentially an externally owned account, for those who don't know, is basically just like the kind of standard account structure on Ethereum and on EVM, right? So this is like what's secured by a single private key, it's what you use within MetaMask, et cetera. But as an alternative, we actually allow developers to tap into smart accounts within the ERC 4337 standard. So as a developer, you can basically say, like, I want to use Biconomy smart account, and I think they're a sponsor of this event, or I want to use a simple account from the Ethereum Foundation, or I want to use CyberConnect or something like this, right? So we actually allow developers to say, I want the social log and I want this onboarding process to result in exactly this type of account. So not just like broadly a smart account that we develop, but actually the specific smart account that the developer actually ends up using. So for this, we have like our own account abstraction SDK. But what might be interesting for this event, specifically within the account abstraction space, is that we take this approach where we actually have built our own bundler and paymaster. Now, our paymaster within account abstraction we call our Omnichain paymaster. And the reason we do this is because typically for developers, with a lot of paymasters, you have to maintain a separate balance for each chain that you want to sponsor transactions on. So I have, I don't know, 2 ETH for Ethereum, and I have some ETH for Base, and these are different balances that I have for different pools that I want to sponsor transactions on. But with Particle, what we have is basically have this idea of an Omnichain paymaster, which is the same as like the normal ERC 437 standard in terms of paymaster standards. But what we do is we essentially like have a user or a developer deploy a USDT, so 10,000 USDT, for example. And as a result, what we can do is say, well, you want to sponsor a transaction on this chain and this chain and this chain. You don't have to hold balances on these chains. You just deploy USDT on one chain, whether that be Ethereum or BNB, and then we automatically convert this USDT to the native token of the chain that you're sponsoring transactions on. So for this, all the developer needs is one balance, and regardless of the chain that they're actually using, it's all kind of unified for them, and it significantly improves the core developer experience. So this is something that we've been building for quite a while, and it's actually been live I think just since earlier this year. So this is like kind of our core thesis around account abstraction. So we want to use account abstraction as kind of like a fundamental component of number one, achieving chain abstraction, but also on the developer experience side, we want it to kind of coexist with this idea of building on multiple chains, building Omnichain. And we don't want to be at odds with that with account abstraction. So we built our stack around modularity in terms of the smart account standards, like I mentioned, and also Omnichain in terms of, as a developer, where you hold funds to sponsor transactions and so on. And we're even getting now into this idea of Omnichain account abstraction, which is a whole nother kind of topic maybe for sometime later. But this is the idea, again, of like basically having a smart account in one location, which then gets deployed and updated across every other chain that you're using. So there's a lot of like, with ERC 437, there's a lot of issues when it comes to multi-chain, not only on like the standard paymaster side that most people integrate, but also on the actual smart account side. So we're building a lot of solutions to solve this, from Omnichain AA to Omnichain paymasters and so on, all of which the paymaster side is live. Omnichain AA should be live pretty soon. So these are things that we think will significantly improve the core developer experience of working with account abstraction on EVM.
Great, thanks. And one of the things you talked about there was around deploying USDT on one place and the automatic converting it for people. These types of actions, right? A lot of the Omnichain stuff that we're all trying to do, or many of us trying to do, they break sort of the old indexing model, right? Or not break it, but it's more difficult, right? I can't just go look at one chain or look at one RPC as we talked about. So especially you two on the end, right? The data lake and with Covalent, all of Covalent's data, how are you helping people in the Omnichain space, right? Because you obviously have the data provided and you say, here's transactions on Ethereum, here's transactions on Bitcoin, but are you adding any sort of intelligence or logic to kind of help connect those things and trace transactions across multiple chains?
Well, the ability to do that is all in the SDK. So it's up to the developer for that, right? The future that we see is DeepIn and a multi-agent world, and ultimately it's going to be up to the developers to be able to dive into that SDK and build their models on top of that. We make sure that what we're providing developers is the source of truth across all the different chains we index, across all the different DEXs we look at, across all the centralized exchanges, all the different sources, and then we make sure that the developers have the easiest tooling available to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So developers always know better where exactly their application is deployed and from where they want to pull this data. So it is important to have a decentralized source of this data. It could be an RPC, but as we know, it doesn't work very well most of the time. So there is really a need to have this decentralized data layer that can be used instead of an RPC as like a ground source of truth. And then the developers can figure out how exactly they want to combine, aggregate, and transform this data. And yeah, also how exactly they want to deploy their indexer. So they want to self-host this. They want to deploy it into a decentralized network or like in a centralized cloud, whatever basically works. And yeah, our goal is to provide the sharpest tool and the valid data for this.
Yeah, I would love to actually chime in here. I like the question because this kind of question is actually a really good showcase of why understanding data in Omnichain world actually makes a lot of sense and very important. Let me give you an example. The question was to, how do you actually, help developer trace the transaction flow across different chains, even across different assets. I think even before we cross-chain, cross-assets, one has to, like this is one of the most unintuitive things I discovered when we actually, build SocialScan Explorer, for example. One very simple example. So one can imagine a transaction is from A account sending, let's say, 10 ETH to B account, and then, after this transaction, EVM records the state changes. So on A balance, there's, minus 10 ETH. On B balance, there's plus 10 ETH. But the complication resides in, for example, the B account can be a smart contract, which is doing simple stuff like distributing 10 ETH equally to 10 accounts. So in fact, after this transaction, actually more than 2 accounts state changes, right? It's actually, A account plus whoever this B contract is transferring to these 10 ETH individually to 10 addresses, and that's how the transaction flow actually works. But without somebody, interpreting smart contract B, you wouldn't know like this is in fact the transaction flow. And there's so many other examples like this, right? This is about smart contract, but there's black holes like centralized exchanges, right? One deposit assets to centralized exchange, but if you don't know that's a centralized exchange wallet, you don't know, even for proof of reserve for exchange, you don't know how much it changes, right? And things like that make it very challenging. I think relying on individual developers is gonna force them to keep on reinventing the wheel. And as such, I think things like this can be hopefully developed into a nice piece of code or API or tool that other people can actually query. Because I don't know where you got this kind of request from, but so far I think most of the transaction flow traces requests happen from security companies who are like AML companies, right? But from an intuition perspective, I think understanding transaction flow is actually quite important in many cases. But I would love to see more use cases of such, yeah.
Gotcha. Good, thanks. And I think Jane had something to add there.
Yeah, and it even gets more complicated than that. Because you look at the topography of network infrastructure for Ethereum, when you're talking about statefulness, as data is propagated across the network, its nearest neighbor, or and it gets into the oldest node, and so you come up with async problems like that. So it's really important to try and get the oldest data archive data that you can possibly find in order to build those ML models.
Gotcha. Great, thanks. And so we're closing up on time. I want to ask kind of one last question. So Bitcoin's very dear to ZetaChain, I think to most people here. I forgot I was wearing sunglasses this whole time. So I want to ask that for everyone. So how does Bitcoin fit into your plans, right? Is it already integrated? Is something you're doing in the future? What does that look like for you? We'll start with you.
Well, for starters, Bitcoin was certainly one of the first price feeds we listed. But going a bit more sophisticated, we see there's a lot of Bitcoin L2s like stacks emerging. Very, very interesting space to say the least. Wherever we see smart contract activity, we want to be sure. Good. We want to be sure that Pyth price feeds are there to support developers building on whatever infrastructure and whatever core layer that they're on.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely have BTC support on the roadmap. I don't think as an infrastructure or application we want to miss out 50% of the market share, right? But definitely, at the same time, I think in BTC ecosystem there's so many new things coming up, right? BRC20, inscriptions, L2s. We definitely, have a very close eye to look at that, and would love to, strike some strong partnership with people like you guys, right? ZetaChain, to tap into the market together. But because that's my thesis, right? I don't want to go into a new ecosystem alone without having strong allies. But at the same time, the entire company is really focused on EVM first, and then we'll think about when do we actually expand to BTC and how much effort we'll be putting into that and stuff like that.
Yeah, when you're ready, we'll be here waiting.
Yeah, so Bitcoin has been a very significant part of our strategy over the past, really just this year so far. Because we have recognized that the Bitcoin ecosystem has been growing very quickly outside of just Bitcoin itself. I mean, of course, you have ordinals and you have the growth of that type of ecosystem natively on Bitcoin. But we also have noticed that the Bitcoin layer 2 ecosystem has been moving way faster than a lot of people realize. I mean, right now you have B Square Network, BEVM, Rootstock, which of course is an older chain. I think there's even there's a bunch that have been announced just over the past few weeks now. You have Citria, which is a really cool one. That's a ZK rollup that uses something called BitVM. So there's a lot of really cool innovation that's happening in the Bitcoin space of how do you scale Bitcoin? I mean, this is a difficult problem, right? And how do you expand its capability to be EVM compatible, right? So these are things that we feel are big opportunities for users in terms of we see a very large user ecosystem and of consumer applications and social-fi gaming, stuff like that emerge off of Bitcoin. Maybe not on Bitcoin layer 1, but on Bitcoin layer 2s that are EVM compatible, or even not even compatible Bitcoin layer 2s like Stacks, for example. These are things that we're quite excited about. So this is why we spent a long time just dedicating engineering resources towards, I think I mentioned this earlier about BTC Connect, which is our core Bitcoin product, allowing for essentially onboarding via a native Bitcoin account, which then can be converted to a smart account on these EVM compatible Bitcoin layer 2s. And you can actually use your key share from the native Bitcoin wallet to sign transactions for the smart account on that layer 2. So kind of unifying the user experience. Again, like I've been talking about, this is our goal in the space is to make it easier for users, make it more natural for them to use applications, and Bitcoin is no exception. So this is an ecosystem that we're really excited about. And of course, as we've been partnering with ZetaChain and other organizations, we've been very happy that others have been generally aligned with this vision that Bitcoin will be its own sort of ecosystem that's flourishing in and of itself, even beyond just its own chain and into layer 2s. So super excited about this. And of course, this is a major part of what we've been thinking about.
Yes, Dimitri, to you again.
So for us, Bitcoin originally was not that interesting because we were kind of focused on applications, and there are not that many applications that are built on Bitcoin. But obviously, the ecosystem is growing, so there are inscriptions, there are L2s, and integrating Bitcoin with Subsquid network is pretty straightforward because there's not that much data, and we have all the pieces together. So it's just the matter of ingesting and putting it into the right schema. So we're probably definitely going to make it by the end of 2024. But currently our focus is on Solana, Cosmos, and probably Move networks, just because this is where I guess all this kind of buzz when it comes to consumer apps and where customized indexing is really needed, and this is our bread and butter.
Now, one quick question for you, SocialScan. When you've mentioned before about Subsquid being a data lake that people can add to, if somebody wanted Bitcoin they were I love Subsquid, but I wish I had Bitcoin, could they just go ahead and index it themselves and put that data in there?
So in the future it will be possible. Currently, our data lake operates in this more permissioned way when it comes to putting this data. So reading data from there is decentralized, so anyone can do that. But currently we operate as a large-scale oracle in the sense that we verify this data and provide it, and we will extend the data providers. So basically, it's more like Chainlink, but for large-scale data. So we have to be super sure that the data is high quality and you can rely on it. So that's why it's kind of not straightforward to open up.
Gotcha, makes sense. And thanks, Jane.
Yeah, so I mean, the ordinal space is super exciting, right? I mean, what we've seen there, it opens up the door for so many different things like ZK on Bitcoin to provide rollups for an L2 on Bitcoin. That's amazing. That's super cool. And we've been supporting Bitcoin for a while now, actually. And we have all that data. We don't necessarily index ordinals yet because the use cases aren't there yet. It's still very much pump and dump schemes. But if you wanted to do that and spin that out yourself, I mean, it's permissionless, and Class C is coming down the line, and we have our decoder in Gold Rush. But what's more important, I think, for us is actually to really build out our decentralized solution for statefulness in Ethereum, because we're moving to such a stateless world.
All right, well, thank you. So that's pretty much our time here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope everyone here learned something. Please, round of applause for all our great guests.
All right, that's it for today for the panels. We're going to have one last session. It's going to be a quick one. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you on behalf of the